Afternoon all. I thought we should continue our evolution of style series today, and let's have a look now at the rise of Alexander Alekhine, who took over from Gilles Rule Capablanca to become world champion. So by the age of 22 he was already among the strongest chess players in the world according to Wiki. During the 20s he won most of the tournaments in which he played. In 1927 he became the 4th world champion by defeating Capablanca, who was widely considered invincible in what would stand as the longest chess championship match held until 1985. Okay, it's worth noting a few things. In the past I've joked actually with people about how the style evolution with regard to world champions was like static then dynamic, static then dynamic, is like a pattern, and we see that with Capablanca being the kind of static positional player being overtaken or supplanted by the more kind of dynamic, adventurous player, and later that seemed to happen again with Karpov and then Kasparov, supplanting Karpov. That's just my opinion, that this wave of the overturning of a style is shown in the transition of world champions. And the game I'd like to pick to start off with to look at Alexander Alekhine is very, very interesting, because here he's up against one of the classic hypermodernists, Richard Reti, who's almost actually playing basically an Alekhine defence in reverse. And, of course, Alekhine defence named after Alexander Alekhine. So we see the hypermodern move played by Richard Reti, G3. So how does Alexander handle this? He handles it with a classical response. He puts a pawn in the centre. He plays E5, and we get a bit of provocation now from Richard Reti. Hypermodern style provocation. And remember, he used knight F3 to defeat Capablanca. And he was celebrated for that. He's one of the few hypermodernists to have taken down a world champion at the time. So here he's up against in 1925 very, very strong Alekhine, and he's playing knight F3 very provocatively, saying grab the centre, can occupy the centre, and I'll try and blow it up later. So what will Alekhine produce to counter this kind of provocative style and this concept regarding the centre? Well, the thing is, as I say, that I believe personally, Alexander Alekhine, he kind of helped the chess world, because I think Capablanca, especially during his 10 years of invincibility, made a very, very good point about how you can use positional play and technique to win games, in a riskless manner. Very, very valid point. But he was also sort of saying as if chess was getting a bit boring, as if we had to do variants, and we need the imaginative players, I think, to always remind us of the limitless possibilities in chess, and the detailed resolution of resources in positions is sometimes amazing, much more beyond the superficial. I think obviously in longer games you can approach like the finesses in detail, examine, because sometimes 1 in 50 of the weird possibilities might actually be a brilliant possibility, and we need that kind of those imaginative players to bring out those resources in games. And of course now things have moved on in the modern times with engines, and we're seeing all sorts of amazing resources all over the place in different openings, etc. But this game, played by Alekhine, is celebrated by many middle game books because of the middle game kind of combinative play later. But Alekhine's not afraid, to kick the knight. So he's playing against like a reverse Alekhine defence when he's playing Richard Reti here. And again, another occupation of the centre now, D5. So is this centre, liable to be blown up? We have 2 points of undermining, theoretically, C4 F3 later. But also, of course, D3 can undermine E4. And actually D3 is the one chosen here. And the pawn's dissolved. It's allowed to be dissolved. Just E takes D3. So it looks as though it's superficially here, as though White's got a nice kind of reverse, Alekhine defence with with extra tempo. You know, he's going to fin check the bishop. I played this variation as black myself, and this is very nice usually. Okay, there's a bit less responsibility, just one pawn in the centre now, but even that can be later undermined, you know, maybe with advantage. So black has to be, you know, very careful about the pressure that can be exerted now on d5. So we see actually knight f6 and now bishop g2. So you know, putting more pressure immediately. A lot of things still, you know, potentially in reserve, and a very, very curious move now actually. Very curious, very interesting, and almost like a computer-like check move, because how many of us would just be content with routine like developing move like bishop e7 and maybe thinking, you know, if c4 maybe c6. I think a lot of us might be tempted for that, just to get on with development, and not really think too much about, you know, this check. But this is the thing about chess, you know, maybe these kind of technical moves are useful sometimes. What on earth is it doing, this cheeky check? Is it losing time? Well, I mean, you know, maybe, you know, c3 might be answered simply by bishop e7, knowing that the pawn on c3, you know, has just hemmed in the knight from going to c3, so it's not really a big time loss to retreat back perhaps to c3 to e7. But white tries to, you know, profit from this check, not minding the exchange of the dark square bishop, you know, bishop d2, and, you know, superficially, you know, what's the big deal about this? And it's also increasing, of course, white's development after bishop d2, knight takes d2, another piece seemingly develops. But how effective is this development, and are there really, you know, exploitable targets in the black position here for that development to have much function? So white actually decides now to use his other undermining move. For this pawn now, it's either like going to be e4 or c4, and white here plays c4. And of course, you know, if black did play like you know, d takes c, then we have a beautiful bishop, you know, fianchetto bishop on the diagonal. We have potential, you know, c file pressure later, and it would seem to be a very, very comfortable, you know, position for white. Or maybe white can actually think about taking with the queen if d takes. So the move played here was another curious looking one, knight a6. And okay, it's exploiting actually the queen on d3. So even if a3 to stop knight b4, there could still be knight c5, and black will be getting this grip on e4 a little bit. That knight might be useful. Maybe can even reroute to e6 later. So white here decided to trade his, you know, flank pawn for a more centre pawn. He plays c takes d, not minding this knight move operation, knight b4. Okay, so still white seems to have the pressure out of the opening. I would say white stands better here, even with this cheeky, like, kind of recapture with the knight. But he's dissolved his centre. There's, you know, the target in the centre's gone. So is black really going to be zapped because he's lost his two centre pawns? Well, not really, because he's got piece pressure now. You know, he's got piece pressure here. If he moves his bishop, he's got piece pressure there. He can reinforce d5. He'd have to worry, I suppose, about e4 at any time. You know, that could be useful to dislodge the knight on d5. Okay, but white actually plays... initially, my impression is it seems to be a supporting move, but maybe, just maybe, a little bit passive. And we've got bits over here, and not, you know, without the knight on f3, if white castles kingside, is the king really going to be vulnerable? Or is that kind of an outrageous thing? Surely white's queenside, you know, pressure should be more significant. And these knights, you know, seemingly dangerous, and this bishop, of course, eyeing down this diagonal. So what is it about the dynamic aspects of the position which Alekhine can bring out here? He reinforces the knight on d5. Okay. And after castles, we see piece pressure. Okay. So rook e8. And after rook fd1, more piece pressure, bishop g4. But what's the significance of this piece pressure? It's to do with king safety, perhaps. This is echoed now after rook d2. It seems the fight is not positional here. It's more tactical and to do with king safety issues. Queen c8. Really, I think, you know, one of the main functions is bishop h3 and trying to weaken, you know, these light squares. Of course, if white loses that fianchetted bishop, the squares around the king are going to be a bit weakened. But, you know, white still has, you know, semi-open c-file, and these knights, you know, are ready to come in, jump and put pressure on these 2 points. So actually, knight c5, and it starts to look fairly unpleasant for black. But, you know, the king side counterplay is weighing up against the queen side, allowing black actually in this position to play bishop h3 without being too severely punished, you know, like losing b7, you know, takes queen h3, knight takes b7, the knight g4. If we have a quick look at that, you know, there's always knight g4 as a possibility here. So, you know, black has some dangerous pressure. And maybe though knight f3 and it carries on, there's another dangerous possibility there I've noticed without checking with an engine. I wonder if you can spot it. Oh dear. I would suspect that e3 is useful. That's my clue. If I gave you 10 seconds to see the move that I'm seeing. Okay. I think knight e3, and that's fairly dangerous for for these 2 squares, for white trying to defend his king. So this queen's a bit of a tactical target in this variation. So that's kind of one echo, without checking with an engine actually. But okay, so bishop f3 was played, and now actually the bishop's challenged again, bishop g4. And it goes back and it's challenged again, bishop f3, and it's challenged again. But white avoids now repetition. So maybe, you know, Alexander did think, you know, he was under severe pressure here on the queen side and wouldn't have minded a draw. But white now actually plays bishop h1. Now, bishop h1, we see here a move which, you know, a lot of people would be playing in like the war zones at Chesscube to try and win a game as quickly as possible. You use your h pawn, and the h pawn is used here as a kind of battering ram, h5. But positionally, it seems, you know, white is playing, you know, classic positional stuff here. He's got the pressure on the queen side, and he's got this potential of the minority attack as well. You know, minority of pawns being used to bash up the majority of pawns. If you can inflict structural damage on c6, would leave, you know, an isolated pawn on c6 and an isolated pawn on a7, and you know that would be, you know, positionally thematic here. So b4, it seems like a strong move. So a6 trying to slow things down. Now rook c4, so really building up the pressure on the queen side. And again, you wouldn't think, you know, black has much going on here, but this is what I mean though. You know, I think Alexander reminded us of the richness of chess, the rich resources, especially, you know, with factors revolving around king safety and other tactical elements. But h4 is starting to create some interesting tactical vulnerabilities, especially after this next kind of routine looking minority attack move a4, you know, to get in the b5. So we see hg, hg, and now a subtle eyeing of black's king, or one of the squares around black's king. There's g3, you know, pawn. So how can g3 though be shown to be a little bit weak in this position? And this is where dynamism comes in. You know, white's playing positionally, his knight's being used for this queenside battering, classic minority attack over here, trying to fracture black's pawn structure with b5. So what does Alekhine do here? Alekhine, he takes on b5, okay, which gives him an active rook on the a file. But it's not really doing much, is it, this rook on the a file, or is it? What's the real thing about this position which was set up with queen c7 eyeing g3? Well, if only g3 could be a bit weaker. I wonder if you can spot this next move if I give you 20 seconds, or you might want to stop the video. So 20 seconds starting from now, or stop the video. Okay, this is why chess is so rich in resources, because you have to appreciate sometimes the significance of the seemingly insignificant. And this is certainly seemingly, initially you might have been totally rejected. But it echoes something we saw earlier in that other variation, which we quickly checked. White earlier, White couldn't try to win the b7 pawn. It's an echo of some of the weaknesses reflected there. This next move, Rook e3. So Rook e3, introduces threats of Rook takes g3, and if the Queen takes and Bishop g2, then Bishop h3 will look to be starting to be very dangerous. And then maybe, knight g4's after that and stuff like that, or knight e3, like echoing an attack on, c4 and g2. So it all starts to look really dangerous after Rook e3. White tries to defend his king a little bit and put the pressure back on the queen side without being mated. So his next move seems sensible, knight f3. But now another paradoxical looking move, capturing away from the centre. But it's justified because where are the pieces all ending up now after this c takes b? Queen takes b5. The queen is ending up on b5, which is now a kind of tactical target for this next move. Knight c3, attacking the queen and attacking e2. So the knight is forking those two. Okay. And offering b7 in the process, which would also, of course, not only attack the queen, but also attack the rook. So this next move from White seems fairly logical. Queen takes b7. But now, Alekhine is not actually afraid to exchange queens. He's investigated even like this possibility, and his initiative with pieces alone, there has been a battering ram, it's been used up, but pieces alone now, even though the queens come off here, in this position, this has been used by middle game books. I remember this in one of my middle game books, this position, this whole combination now. So knight takes e2 check. Okay, knight takes e2 check. So there's a fork on. But remember, the rook isn't pre on e3. So White just plays king h2, knowing that if knight takes, then he can take here, and he still looks to be doing quite well. But Alekhine, he keeps his rook on pre on e3. He plays actually knight e4. So we have here a real, if we look at this position, look at all these pieces jammed together, tactically here. This cluster of pieces is quite remarkable, this position. So both rooks are being attacked, this one and this one. This knight's also attacked. This rook's ready to be quite dangerous potentially on the a file. So what on earth is going on here? Can White just simply, at least try and consider taking this rook now? Or is it really bad that something else like knight takes c1 is good here? White attacks the knight. So trying to sort of expose the fact that if the rook ever moves, there's like rook takes e4. But now, of course, the rook can be indirectly defended by taking its attacker, knight takes f2, but it's leaving surely a tactical vulnerability here for black. Or what is there of vulnerability? The knight is actually protecting g4, which is attacked by that. The rook's no longer attacked. And this rook, of course, is defending e2. So for the moment, it doesn't seem as though black's position can be punished. So White actually ends up playing here bishop g2, and then we see bishop e6, and the start of a little combination which is really neat. The rook retreats, check, king h3, discovered check from the bishop, and now we see rook takes f3. So this is starting to win material for black. If bishop takes, then there's check maybe, and knight takes d2, which would start to win, you know, lots of material. So rook takes e2, but we have again this knight g4 check. And of course, note the function of this rook. You know, if king h1, then rook a1 is really dangerous. So the king has to winningly go into this discovered seesaw check again, unfortunately. King h3. Then we have check, you know, blocking the discoverer from the rook. It can't be taken, it's blocked. And now, just taking on c2. Okay. And of course, if white took on c2, then rook f2 is a bit of a... Sorry, not rook f2. The rook would be free to move, and black would be the exchange up. So bishop takes f3 was chosen. But black finishes off neatly now with knight d4. So attacking those two pieces. And white resigned here, because if white had, you know, tried to protect the bishop, then takes, and then we end up with this nasty tail end move, bishop d5, and the rook cannot be used to defend the knight. So that would be a nasty, like, discover attack to finish off. So what a game, and a demonstration really of dynamism, and against you know, the very provocative opening. So what was really exposed were the dynamic, you know, tactical aspects, and the echoing of, you know, slight, you know, delicate weaknesses around white's king, and then pure, you know, a cluster of pieces, usually something like that, very, very rarely seen. But the prelude to all of that were these kind of mysterious looking moves, bishop b4, which we wouldn't really, I suppose, give much consideration to. But it showed to have great effect. You know, with the exchange in retrospect of the dark square bishop, we can say in retrospect, you know, that maybe you could argue that's why e3 was a bit weaker later. You know, if white had a light square bishop, would e3 have been such a weakness later? And e3, you know, if we think about h5 and h4 later, again, that was kind of weakening e3, because if this pawn is overloaded, then, you know, e3 is becoming ripe for tactical exploitation. But until you've seen a game like this, you wouldn't really believe that black could really fend off this queenside onslaught with such, you know, tactical dynamism and operations against white's kingside, because white was really playing by the book. You know, the minority attack, the building up of pressure, threatening to fracture all of black's pawns. And what was, you know, Alekhine doing? He was playing, you know, dynamically. He's got a hook on that e3 square, which after this repetition was avoided, you know, he's echoing again the dynamism of the position. In particular, the e3 square is becoming a little bit of an issue now, a major issue. After this queen c7, the scene's being set for this shocking move, visually shocking, rook e3. And this is why chess is so beautiful, you know, for these possibilities to exist. And, you know, the king's safety aspects can never really be underestimated. So knight f3, then capturing away from the centre, because really the dynamism rules now in the position. The piece play has become the dominant, like, theme. Forget structure. The pawns have all been removed anyway on the queen side, as well as black centre pawns. So we're left now with pure, you know, piece play and combination play. Check, then this knight e4, you know, leaving lots of bits unpre. I would hate to engine check this. I don't want to bore you. I'll give you the PGN. You can engine check all the variations to your heart's content. It's just visually very, very impressive, this cluster of pieces here. You know, rook c4. Okay, so now we see knight takes f2, and everything seems to be hanging together tactically for black, and more actually after bishop e6, because now this bishop e6 has introduced, you know, this knight g4 possibility, which is really, really dangerous. So after, you know, the rook, it didn't, decided he couldn't go to b4 for some reason. Otherwise, But even so, knight g4 would still be supported by the bishop on e6. So knight g4 is an open invitation now, and the rook's always threatening to come to a1. So this kind of seesaw check. Now rook takes f3, and we're back again to this seesaw check. And this final kind of neat combination winning material. So dynamism, that is the rude awakening. That's why I joke sometimes about this static and then dynamic pattern that we see in the lineup of world champions. We're reminded, chess of the two sides, kind of the internal and the external qualities of the game. The external is like the positional play, what you can see on the surface, the pawn structure driven play. But the internal qualities are other dynamic possibilities which do exist in the position, relating to often to king safety and piece play and piece pressure. And first the centre was relinquished by Alexander, then his queenside pawns were relinquished, and we end up exposing all these dynamic aspects. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope there's a little bit of a clue of what Alexander represented for the evolution of style. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.